Hello, and a big warm welcome to the Guardian Doula's Diary podcast. My name is Angela Deuce, or Angie. I'm your host and the founder of Guardian Doula. I'm a certified birth and postpartum doula and childbirth educator based on Sydney's Northern Beaches and serving women and their families all throughout Sydney. This podcast is an honest collection of the stories and experiences of birthing women and the professionals that support them to empower, equip, and inspire us all. Let's get into it. This episode has been quite sort of long awaited and much anticipated. I think because it's something that people find really confusing. First-time parents, definitely, but even second and third-time parents, because every birth is so different and every labor is so different. So figuring out the right timing to go to the hospital can be really confusing, even if you have done this before. But all the more if you've never done it before, it's like extra hard to make the call and to kind of figure out when that sweet spot is. I know even like in my own experiences, so if you new around here, I have 4 little ones. So yes, I've given birth 4 times myself, and every single one of those births was so different. But to kind of, highlight a really key difference was like my first birth was 52 hours long. I actually have an episode that I posted sort of telling that whole birth story. So if you're interested, you can go and listen to that. I kind of explained the whole thing and like what went down. And then I also shared a lot of reflections on like the mistakes that I made and what I would have done differently and all the things, because hindsight is always 20/20. But yes, first labor was very, very long. And then my second baby like flew out. I had such a fast labor. It was like 2 hours and 45 minutes of active labor. So very, very, very different, which I think is one tiny example that really highlights the need for some education around this topic, because it's so hard. Like, it's really tough. And I think there's so many formulas out there that try and teach you how to figure out when it's the right time to go to the hospital. But at the end of the day, like, we know that birth doesn't fit into a formula or a box or a textbook. So it can be really tough. And I feel like you need more than those formulas that are kind of commonly offered to women to help make that decision. But we will get to all of those things. I think let's like zoom out and really start from the beginning, because this decision is really huge. And I think before we talk about like how to get the timing right, let's talk about why it's important to get it right. Okay. I mean, the obvious reality is that if you get there way too early, then you're stuck in a hospital bed dealing with unnecessary interventions. Whereas if you wait too long, we are then risking a car park baby, which most people don't plan on giving birth in a car park. There's home birth and there's hospital birth, but I've not met very many women that are like, I want to give birth in the car park. So it's important. Let's break it down. Okay. So yes, let's talk about why the timing really does matter so much. Why shouldn't I just go in as soon as labor starts? Why is this so crucial? I think, so the first thing to say is that arriving too early, especially if you're still in early labor, really significantly increases your chances of unnecessary interventions, right? So things like having your labor sped up, which is called augmentation of labor. And that can be done. There's so many different ways that can happen, whether that's like, let's just break your waters and help things go more quickly. Or maybe you are offered a syntocinon drip and it's like not even medically indicated, but we just want to speed it up because while you're here, we may as well speed it up. Or epidurals before you're ready, or even like cesareans become more likely when you just rock up to the hospital too early, right? So I think the unnecessary intervention is a really important thing to just be mindful of when you are kind of putting things in place to make sure that you're not going in too early, because it is a very real ramification sometimes of going in too early. And then the other thing to mention is that a hospital stay can feel really long and exhausting. I mean, part of that too is that hospitals run on a schedule, right? So if you're not progressing fast enough, you are likely to feel quite pressured into interventions to speed labor along. And then even just logistically, like sometimes, if you're there for ages and ages, it's likely that you'll be there during a shift change. And then it's like, well, already in Australia, we have this really unfortunate issue around a huge lack of continuity of care, which is one of the reasons that having a doula on your birth team is so important, because even if you're in a program like the MGP, which stands for Midwifery Group Practice, in those programs, the goal is that the midwife comes to your birth, but they're not on call 24/7. So I've had lots of clients over the years who have not had their MGP midwife able to attend their birth, and that sucks. So thank goodness they had a doula who is on call for them 24/7 for literally 4 weeks around their due date. But yes, so the continuity of care thing, I think, is also a significant part of getting that timing right, because if you're there for longer than, let's say 12 hours, not only are you already meeting a new midwife for the first time when you rock up in labour, the vast majority of women in Australia who are giving birth in the hospital will not have the same midwife, that they've already built trust with and that they've built rapport with. Like, you are rocking up and you're getting whoever's on shift that day. So it's really unfortunate when you rock up way too early and then now you've just established a little bit of rapport with this midwife, but now, we're nowhere near having a baby and the shifts change and now we're back at square one meeting a whole new team. Generally speaking, like most hospitals, the shifts tend to change around 7 and 7, so like 7 a.m, 7 p.m, or thereabouts, depending on the hospital. But if you're rocking up at like 8 a.m. in super early labour and then 7 p.m. comes around, like now you've got a whole new team. And if you had rocked up in really early labour, like maybe you could have done a lot of that labouring at home, come to the hospital at like 10 p.m. and then it's like, bang, now we've had one consistent midwife, So that's just one little sort of side note. But I think, the main thing is that hospitals run on a schedule and they love to be able to speed things up and make things more efficient because someone else needs that room that you're in. Or, people need to go on their lunch breaks or whatever the reasons are. And then I think the other thing is loss of comfort. Like at home, you can move really freely. You have access to all the food that you like. You can rest. You can labour in ways that feel really natural to you. But then once you are admitted to the hospital, those kind of freedoms can very quickly shrink. I even have clients who forget that they are allowed to leave the room that they're labouring in. They might rock up to the hospital and go, oh, this was a little bit early. And then I'm just thinking of a specific example. I had a mum recently hire me for her second baby because she had quite a traumatic birth with her first. And she was telling me the story of her first. She kind of went in there way too early because they thought it seems intense, let's go in. But it was too early, unfortunately. And they were in there for ages, 18 hours or something before they met their baby, because they just didn't know when to go in. And they just didn't even know that you were allowed to actually leave the room and go for a walk and do all the things, So it's really hard. You forget that you have all these freedoms. Whereas if she was laboring at home for all of that early labor, she would have had a lot more options. She would have had a lot more autonomy, a lot more freedom. You're more comfortable. Your oxytocin production is a lot higher at home when you're in a familiar environment that feels safe. You're feeling unobserved. You're not feeling rushed. You're not feeling, threatened by the presence of these unknown people. So there is so much to be said for staying at home as long as possible, or as long as appropriate. And I think, it's something that I really wish there was more education and preparation around, because I know that it would make such a big difference to women's births if they were not going into the hospital too early, because of how common this cascade of intervention is and all the things. Even just getting bored. Sometimes the woman will just be bored because she's been in the hospital for so freaking long and she's like, oh my gosh, I'm just over this. Fine, put me on the Synto drip. I'm done. And that's really unfortunate because these are women who really wanted a natural birth, and then getting yourself onto a Syntocinon drip when there's no medical indication or need for it is probably one of the worst things you can do in terms of the impact that has on your odds to then have the natural physiological birth that you probably were hoping for. I know most people that listen to my podcast and most people that reach out to me do really want a totally natural birth, and that's not everyone, and that's totally fine if you are one of those women that is just no, I want my epidural as soon as I can have it. There's no right or wrong, that's fine. But it is certainly true that most women who are listening to my podcast and they are following my Instagram and they are hiring me to work with them, they are consuming my information and they're getting me on their birth team because the outcome that they really hope for is a natural, physiological, unmedicated birth. And so if that is you, the timing is so crucial, like really genuinely so crucial. And obviously we don't want to wait too long, right? Like we want there to be enough time that you are getting settled in, you're getting comfortable, you can access all the different things you want. Like maybe you want to use the shower, maybe you want time for the bathtub to fill up. Like I've definitely had some births that have just gone really, really fast and there's not even been time to fill up the bathtub. The mums have been stoked with their birth afterwards. But, you know, I think it is helpful to kind of nail the sweet spot if you can. So let's talk about one of the kind of traditional things. I think the main thing that I hear women are being told around like how to figure out when to go into the hospital is the 511 rule. Now, this is so common, and I'll just explain to you quickly like what it actually is, what the 511 rule kind of says. So it's pretty self-explanatory. It kind of is what it sounds like. It's the idea that when your contractions are 5 minutes apart, so that's the 5, each contraction is lasting for a full minute, that's the 1, and this pattern has been happening for 1 hour, so that's the second one. So 5, 1, 1, contractions 5 minutes apart, lasting 1 minute for 1 hour. That this is like the be all and end all. This is when you need to come to the hospital, go, as soon as you get to 511. But this is so problematic. It's like, honestly, such bad advice if I am just going to call a spade, because while, yes, it's a good sort of starting point to be like, okay, maybe we're coming into active labor, that's all it is, a starting point. It is absolutely not a one-size-fits-all formula, because if you know anything about birth, we know that birth does not fit into a formula. It honestly very rarely fits into a formula. It's not even like, oh, sometimes it doesn't fit into a box or a formula. It's like it actually usually doesn't. So I think it's important to have other things and other signs and other ways that you can be gauging whether or not it's the right time to leave for the hospital, other than this like stupid 511 rule. Because there are women who like will never get to the 511 point. You know, I've had clients where their contractions are like 6 or 7 minutes apart and then bang, they go straight to being 1 or 2 minutes apart and they're about to push a baby out. Like, and they just skip that whole 511 thing altogether, you know, or sometimes a woman will be at 511, let's say, and they don't meet their baby for another like 24 hours. And it's like, well, it would have been way too soon to go into the hospital at the point that you were at 511 because you were still so far off meeting your baby. And this is the unfortunate thing with formulas, is that they don't often work. So yeah, you've got to have other things that you can look out for. I think another thing to mention is that, you know, sometimes women's contraction patterns kind of make no sense the whole way through labor. And you actually sit there and you're like, I'm really confused by these contraction patterns. They're not making sense. They're not adding up. I literally had this like 2 weeks ago with a client. And I was like, your contraction patterns make absolutely no sense. Like everything about your contraction patterns. And I'm like very experienced at looking at contraction patterns and then translating them and interpreting them. And oftentimes, contraction patterns can tell us all sorts of things. They can tell us how the labor is progressing. They can tell us about if the baby's in a weird position and what position, if a weird position. Like there is so much that contraction patterns can tell us. And that's why I love OMP, optimal maternal positioning, so much, because it's just a really, really helpful set of skills to be interpreting contraction patterns and then support the mum to have her labor progress as smoothly as possible. But there is certainly more that needs to be considered. And so for this mum in particular that I just mentioned, her contraction patterns the whole way through, they were looking like a very classic early labor contraction patterns. They were not lasting a full minute. In fact, some of them were 30 seconds, some of them were 1 minute and 10 seconds, some of them were 45 seconds, some of them were 50, and they were just all over the place. Sometimes the contractions were like every 4 minutes, then sometimes they were 1 minute apart, then sometimes they were 6 minutes apart, then sometimes 3 minutes. Like they were just all over the place. But every other sign that she was kind of giving us was like, this baby's coming soon. And so I think it's so important that you know what those other signs are and that you are kind of equipped to be confident in this situation. So yes, 511 rule, that's the main way that people are told oh, call the hospital when you're at 511, or come into the hospital when you're 511, or call the doula when you're at 511. But it's just not enough. So I want to kind of help you get some other good practical things that you can look out for so that you're a little bit better equipped. But I do want to call out that one of the absolute best things you can do, you already know what I'm going to say, is hire a doula. Because this is one of the very many places where a doula becomes invaluable. Because let's be very honest with ourselves, okay? When you are in labor, everything feels extremely intense. Even early labor that is like relatively not intense, it's still labor. Like early labor is still labor, right? So you need someone who knows what real, proper, active labor looks like, and who can kind of guide you through those tricky early stages where you're like, oh, is it not? What's going on? Yeah, I help my clients kind of track their labor patterns. I can kind of really tell the difference between strong early labor and then like true active labor. I give them strategies to labor at home for longer. So that is all sorts of things. That's helping with positioning, comfort measures, emotional support so that you're not kind of rushing to the hospital out of fear. It's that reassurance. And then also watching out really closely for the key signs of transition. So yes, you do. You want to walk into the hospital at the right moment. Honestly, I think around transition or shortly after is like the best time, especially if you want to have a baby naturally. And obviously there's so much nuance to this. Like, it's like, are you having a VBAC? Do you have any other complications? Is there there's so much that goes into it. And again, that's why you need a doula who can give you very tailored, specific, nuanced support and information around this stuff and help you navigate it. But yes, I just really want to emphasize, there is so much research that proves the benefits of having a doula. There are so many benefits, and one of the really helpful things is that we do help you kind of get this timing right. And I say right with a grain of salt because it's so different for everyone. But honestly, that's, again, why you need the doula, because it is different for everyone. And if you have someone who has been around birth and really knows birth, then that's really, really helpful. So, okay, when should you leave? This is what I kind of tend to look for and what I tell my clients. Let's just say, if your contractions are really strong, nice and intense, they require deep focus, and you cannot talk or walk through them easily. You get this contraction and it's like everything stops and you are going inward, you are focusing, it's like taking everything inside of you to get through that contraction. Maybe it's time to go to the hospital. Okay, that's like a maybe. If you are not in that place where they're not consistent, they're not that strong, they're not requiring deep focus, and you can still talk through them, then, oh my gosh, do not go to that hospital. It is probably way too early, okay? But if they are consistently coming, they are strong, they're intense, you are having to focus and you cannot talk through them, you're going into labor land, right? I call it labor land. You're in this other place. Then maybe it's time to go to the hospital. Okay, that's maybe. When it's definitely time to go to the hospital is if you are feeling pressure in your bum, you need to do a big poo or an urge to bear down. That's probably because you're going to have a baby really, really soon, and I'd be getting myself there pretty quick. Obviously you don't need to be unsafe and be flooring it, speeding down the main road and being crazy. But look, if you're feeling that pressure in your bum and you feel like you just need to do a huge poo, this is so with that client where her contraction patterns weren't making much sense, but I was like, I feel like we might be on here. It was all the things, all the signs of transition. She was getting really, really hot and sweaty. She was starting to say, oh, I just can't do it, which little side note, it's very common that you have multiple moments where you go, oh, I can't do it. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're about to have a baby, the first time you feel like you can't continue. Definitely, yes, that is a super telltale sign of transition and that you are getting close. But it's also very normal to be 3 centimeters and you're I can't do it. It's a lot of women, most women will have multiple, what I call sort of crises of confidence, or have a crisis of confidence where you're I can't do it, I can't go on. And that's when it is your birth team's job to get around you and really take back control and, help you kind of get back into your zone and refocus and reboot, which, is super important. And a big part of what your doula will be doing for you. But yes, so this mum she was having her crisis of confidence. It was intense. She was like, I just can't do it anymore. Nothing was cutting it. She had thrown up, another pretty classic sign of transition. She was, hot and sweaty, and she was getting pressure in her bum. And so I said to her, okay, why don't you go and try and sit on the toilet, see if you can do a poo. And while she sat on the toilet doing the poo or trying to do a poo, I kind of whispered to her husband, like, we might need to go here, like we might be on. And so while she was in the toilet, and again, you want to always be very, very calm. Like, I'm very intentional with the way that I act and behave around the women that I support when they're in labor. So it was like, okay, I'll give you a little moment, some privacy, close the door. And then I was kind of scurrying around, making sure that I was helping the husband get all the bags together and like, okay, have you got the car keys? Do you have the antenatal card? Have you got your snacks? Is the colostrum out the freezer? Like all the things that can be really hard for a partner to think of in the heat of the moment because there's a lot going on, So yes, I was like, go see if you can do a poo. And obviously in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, well, if there's no poo that comes out, it's probably because there's a head there. So we need to get into the hospital. And that's exactly what happened. There was no poo coming out. So I said, look, baby's probably pretty low in your pelvis at this point. Let's go in. And so we went in and she literally had her baby 1 hour after we walked into the hospital, which was pretty phenomenal. She was amazing. She had such a great birth. But yes, so to kind of reiterate, if the contractions are consistent, they're strong, they're intense, they require all of your focus, you cannot talk through them, you're very much in labor land, maybe it's time to go in. I can't say for sure without like being in the room and looking at you, but maybe that's a good sign. But certainly if you are feeling pressure in your bum or that really like intense urge to bear down, especially if this is not your first baby, because generally, like even if the mum's bearing down as you walk into the doors, like, yes, this is cutting it fine. I totally can acknowledge this is cutting it a little bit fine. But for a first time baby, it's like somewhat unlikely that baby's going to just come flying out in the lobby. But if this is like your second, third, fourth, fifth baby, pushing tends to be a little bit faster. So yes, you do want to be mindful of that. Or if you just know in your gut that it's time, like if you're like, I just know that this baby is coming and I need to go in, let's go in, But then I also say, like, if in doubt, wait it out. If you're a little bit 50-50 and you're like, well, I don't know, maybe it's intense, maybe it's not intense, then usually, and again, like I just feel like I have to keep reiterating, there is no like hard and fast rule, never say never. So I won't say that this is always the case because it's not always the case, but often if you are kind of tossing up and you're like, do I go in, do I not go in? Generally speaking, if in doubt, you should wait it out because when it's really intense, like you will know and you will feel it and you'll be like, oh my gosh, this baby's, we're well on our way. We need to go. The other thing to mention is that if you're feeling intense pain between your contractions or let's say your waters break, right? And you've noticed that there's some bright red blood, different to your mucus plug. Your mucus plug will be kind of, very mucousy, like literally it would look like snot in your underwear. And it might be kind of pink or red tinged. That's totally normal, probably just your mucus plug. But if you're seeing really thin, bright red blood that looks similar to your period, that is something to be a little bit concerned about, pay attention to that. Or if your waters are broken and you're noticing, the blood thing applies even if your waters haven't broken. That can be like either or. But if your waters have broken specifically and you're noticing like a greeny brown kind of tinge to your waters, that can be meconium, which is the baby's poo. So if you're noticing that in your waters, that's also kind of a reason to make sure you're getting in there pretty quick just to be checked out because it's possible that is happening because the baby is in distress. So definitely worth getting looked at if that's happening. And then like maybe you go in and everyone, you have everything checked and everything's all good. And then it's like, oh, baby's perfect. You can go home. But maybe not. So it is good to kind of check if you've got signs and symptoms like that. Or even just in your gut, if you're like, something's not right, maybe the movements are off or maybe something in you is like, oh, I just need to be checked here. Then you can always go in, have a check and say like, oh, if everything's all good, I'd love to just labor at home for as long as possible. But yeah, those are a few kind of things to look for, like those signs of transition, if the woman is like, I can't do this anymore. It's so intense. She's sweating, she's vomiting. It's like, okay, we're probably in transition. Like maybe we need to get there. And her behavior. That's one of the biggest things that you can look for, is like, is she far gone? Like, this mama is in labor land. If she's not in labor land and she's kind of acting quite normal, then it's probably too soon. But honestly, the biggest thing that I can say is hire a doula. Hire a doula, hire a doula. Like, just don't wing it. Make sure that you have someone who knows the process inside and out, who can keep you at home as long as is comfortable and reasonable and, you know, like not silly. We're not going to be like, no, you're just having a home birth, sorry. And also, of course, if at any point my client is like, no, I really, really want to go in, even if I think it's a little bit too early, like, if they want to go in, then we're going in. You know, the decision is absolutely always, always, always yours at the end of the day. Like, I will give you information. I can give you my opinion if you want me to share it with you, but it's always, always your call. I'm a really big believer in that because of how much I believe in the mum's instincts. So yeah, I think the best way that you can make the decision easier for yourself is to just have a doula and take the guesswork out of it, you know? I think it's really handy to have someone who is super familiar with birth. We've seen birth in many different forms and in many different shapes and ways, and who is, just very well acquainted with the nuance of birth. I honestly think it's just like such an invaluable resource. So if you are expecting and you want someone to help you figure this out with confidence, then let's chat. I do tend to book out pretty far in advance, and I actually have very limited availability for the rest of 2025. I do still have spots available, but just not very many. So if you are thinking about it, definitely reach out sooner than later. Like, literally send me an email now before this episode finishes. And we can connect, and you can kind of, decide if you think that that would be a worthwhile resource for you. I definitely think it's a worthwhile resource for everyone, and the research would agree. But yes, I hope that was helpful and kind of informative. I guess the final takeaway points are: hire a doula to get the guesswork out of it. Yes, look at your contraction patterns. Absolutely, they do tell us a lot, but they are not everything. And you also need to be focusing on the woman's behavior, what she is doing, what she is saying, and the other kind of signs and symptoms that are going on. Looking at the contraction patterns on their own is just not going to cut it. It's not enough. You need a lot more to kind of make that decision. So I hope that was helpful. Yes, I'm just going to leave it at that, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye, guys. Thanks for joining us for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a rating or a comment, and I can't wait to see you back here for the next one.